What's up guys, my name is Tony, and today I'm going to give you a quick and painless guide on installing Hyprland on Arch Linux. Hyprland is a dynamic window manager and Wayland compositor that is highly customizable, and it emphasizes aesthetics, functionality, and extensibility. At the end of this guide, you will no longer be using X11, and you'll be able to fully customize your own build of Hyprland on your own hardware. This guide will allow you to go from a screen that looks something like this to a fully customized setup that looks something like this. We are going to be using Arch Linux today, but Hyprland is available on most distributions, so if you are a NixOS user or Gentoo or Debian or even FreeBSD, check out the wiki here for the installation instructions. But other than that, the customization aspect of this guide will still apply to you. The first thing I'm going to do is install a fresh Arch Linux, and since today's guide is not about how to install Arch Linux, I'm going to speed through that process and catch you guys at the login screen. If you want help installing Arch Linux, check out my Arch Linux tutorial. Alright, that took about 8 minutes to run through here and we're ready to go. So I went ahead and posted today's tutorial in a readable form on my website, and that's going to be tonybytheway.com. So if we head on over to this tutorial here, you can use this as a resource and follow along. It's got a table of contents, it's got everything we need. So feel free to reference this while you walk through your own Hyprland configuration. So we are starting at a very fresh and minimal Arch build. We've only installed base, base devil, Linux firmware, and soft firmware, which is all you will need to get started. And if you are an Arch user, you can basically start anywhere as long as you've installed those packages and gotten a bootloader up and running. So let's start by installing all of the required packages for today's setup. The beautiful thing about starting on a fresh install like this is that you guys get to see the most minimal setup as possible in terms of packages. So let's grab all the Hyprland tools. We take a look at the Arch wiki here and we look at the Hyprland page. We can see all the packages that are included in the Hyprland package here. It actually includes Wayland and a lot of all the necessary tools you're going to need to get things started today, which is really convenient for us. So let's type sudo pacman-syu and we'll grab Hyprland. We will get xorg-x Wayland in case we need to use any x Wayland utilities, and Hyprpaper, which is a very minimal wallpaper tool for Hyprland. That's going to be about 500 megabytes, 117 packages, so let that rip, and I'll see you shortly. For other packages, I'm going to be using Vim today to edit all the files. You can feel free to use any text editor of your choice. So let's type sudo pacman-s, and I'm going to grab Vim. We're going to need Wofi, which is an application launcher for Wayland. We're going to use Foot, a terminal emulator in Wayland. Going to grab Waybar, which is the power bar that we're going to be using today. And we'll get Dolphin, which is a file manager that works in Wayland. And we will get Firefox for our web browser. In case we want to version control this configuration, we'll go ahead and grab Git. Go ahead and enter for these defaults. It's 1,000 megabytes for that. A lot of that's Firefox, but okay. See you guys shortly. All right. Last thing we want today is a nerd font to render a lot of the icons. Let's grab JetBrains Mono. So in case you don't ever remember a package name on Arch, you can always do pacman-ss and type something that's in the package name. In this case, I'm going to do JetBrains. And we see it's TTF JetBrains Mono Nerd. So we're going to grab that today. So we'll do sudo pacman-s TTF JetBrains Mono Nerd. And there we go. We're ready to move on to the config file. Let's go ahead and create the directory for the Hyprland config file here and copy the template config file into it. This step is really important because I'm personally going to be using Foot instead of Kitty, so I won't be able to launch a terminal in Hyprland if I use the default config file. So for that, let's do mkdir-p.config hyper, and we'll do cp user share hyprland.conf into .config hyper. And now that that file exists, we can go ahead and open it up with Vim here. And here we are. So we're going to go down to this terminal section here, and instead of Kitty, I'm going to change this to Foot, and that's going to work for my setup. Now, if you want to use Kitty, go ahead and use it. Just make sure to add that to your installation with Pacman. So we are ready to reboot this machine and launch Hyprland. So let's go ahead and reboot it. All right, and to launch Hyprland, all we need to do is type Hyprland. Make sure to spell that correct. And there we go, beautiful. We see the Hyprland logo. First thing we have to do here is open up a terminal. That's gonna be with Super Q, and there's foot. Now I need to correct my monitor resolution, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and that is in my Hyprland config. So we'll do vim.config hyper. Open up that Hyprland config, and we're gonna scroll down to monitor here. In this section here, we do see it's comma, preferred, auto. Now, per the Hyprland wiki, we see that that's name, resolution, position, and scale. And it does have a common example here. For me, for my situation, I'm gonna change the resolution to 1920 by 1080, and I'm gonna change that scale to 1. So let's change this to 1920 by 1080, change this one to 1. And there we go, beautiful. Can't see anything, but we've got the full size monitor. Quit out of that. In order to list your monitors, similar to using xrandr on the Xorg side of things, you just type hyperctl monitors. So I would use that command to determine what monitor you need to set in that line. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next step. All right, the next step here today is going to be jumping into our foot config and quickly making our terminal a little bit more readable. So let's go ahead and make that file. Let's do mkdir.config/foot. And then vim.config/foot/foot.ini. And for today's install, we're gonna do font equals JetBrains Mono, since that's what the font we chose was. NF for nerd font. Size, we'll make that 16. You can play with that and tinker with that. And let's change the padding to 8x8. Just to add a little bit of padding on the sides and top of the terminal. And we are going to go with a Tokyo night theme for today's Rice. So let's go ahead and check out this website. It's a really convenient website for the Tokyo night theme. I will leave a link to this site below the subscribe button of the video. So let's go ahead and click on ports, and let's click on foot. And these are the colors for that foot terminal. So let's just copy these, go back into this file here, paste those in there. Can write that, quit that file, and clear that. We can actually just close this terminal here with Super C and open a new one with Super Q. There we go. Already looks much better. Honestly, this Rice is pretty minimal. It's just a terminal, literally, but it's it's looking a lot better than a lot of configs I see out there. Let's go ahead and move on to the next step. All right, we are going to be using Waybar today, and this is just a power bar, customizable bar for Wayland. It was made for Sway, which is an i3 port over to Wayland, but we can use it for Hyprland today. So beautiful thing about the Hyprland config file is that whenever we save that file, it automatically refreshes Hyprland, which is going to be convenient. So let's jump right back into that Hyprland config file. vim.config hyprland.conf. Scroll down to these programs here, and let's add a quick command to kill Waybar and restart it, so that whenever we edit the Waybar config file, we can quickly restart it within Hyprland. So let's add a variable called reload Waybar. Set that equal to pkill Waybar. Semicolon Waybar and let's also go down to this auto start section here, and we see that exec once is how you start a program when Hyprland initially launches. So let's do exec once equals Waybar and all right, that's good for now. Let's go ahead and scroll down to ensure the reload Waybar script is binded. And right here in this bind section, what I'll do is I will copy this, make a new line with it. We are going to use R for this, so instead of menu here, we're going to do reload Waybar, which means we do have to change the menu keybind. But let's change a couple of these keybinds. And this is going to be personal preference, but for me, I like my terminal to be super return or super enter. So let's change that to super return. Kill the active window. I like that to be super Q. And then down to that menu, that's going to be Wofi today. So for that, I personally like using super D, and that's going to be good for now as far as the binds go. Let's move on to a couple pretty big quality of life updates, and then we can jump out of this file. All right, let's go down to this input section, and let's add something here for key repeat delay. Let's do repeat rate equals 35, and repeat delay equals 200. Now what this does is this allows your key repeat rate to be set to 200 milliseconds of delay and 35 repeats per second. So the default value I believe is in the 500s for the milliseconds. And you can see that if you hold J in Vim, it takes a couple seconds to actually start repeating. I don't like that at all. That slows me down. This is going to be the equivalent of xset R rate 235. For Xorg. If you're moving over from Xorg, that's what that's going to be. This is going to be really convenient. In fact, we could just save the file. It's already going to be updated. Yeah, it's a lot faster. Perfect. All right, one more thing. The cursor sometimes has some issues for me timing out on my laptop. So to prevent that, I'll give you guys a little tip here. Let's do cursor, and we'll do inactive timeout equals 30 for 30 seconds, and no hardware cursors equals true. And that's going to prevent the mouse cursor from glitching out. All right, we should be good to move on to the next step. So let's go ahead and save, quit this file. Clear that. So now that Waybar is binded to Super R, let's go ahead and load it once with Super R. There we go. Beautiful Waybar default. All right, so to customize this config file, we actually need it to exist in our home folder. So let's copy the default config over, sort of like what we did for Hyprland. Sudo cp-r for recursive, etc xdg Waybar. We're gonna put that in .config Waybar. We do see that that is going to be still owned by root since we copied it from Etsy. So we do want to change ownership of that to whatever your username is. So for me, I'm going to do sudo chown-r tony.config Waybar. And now if we run lsla, we do see that Tony does own those files, so we are able to edit them. All right, let's jump into configuring that. Let's do vim.config/waybar/dot, and that'll open up the netrw for me. And we see a config.jsonc and a style.css. So we're gonna start with that config.jsonc file here, because that's where all the widgets and workspace stuff lives. So let's open that file. And at the top of the file, we do see the layer and the position, etc. I'm gonna uncomment this. And for the position, if you are somebody who prefers the bar to be at the bottom, you can just set this to bottom here. We'll go ahead and take a look at what that looks like by hitting Super R. And there you go. The bar is down here on the bottom. But for me, for today's build, we're going to put it back on the top. So let's set that there. I'm going to delete some comments here, clean that up a little bit, and reload that. Now this is obvious. This is the height. And the width. The width, it doesn't have to be the full width of your screen, but I do like it like that, so I'm going to keep that. But if you want to tinker with these settings, feel free. I'm going to delete that though. Same thing with the height, the spacing. We see in the JSON file here, there are a bunch of modules loaded on the left side, but we actually look at the left side of our Waybar and we don't see anything. And the reason for that is that we're not using Sway, and so we don't have our workspaces. But the beautiful thing about Hyprland is it literally is a drop-in replacement for Sway as far as the workspaces module goes. So we can just change Sway to Hyprland, and we can go ahead and delete the bottom 3 modules because we're not going to be using those today. So we've got that Hyprland Workspaces module on the left. Now this module exists, it's in the file. So let's search for Workspaces. It's the Sway Workspaces module. So go ahead and uncomment that Workspaces module and make sure to change Sway to Hyprland. Now that's going to work on refresh here. We'll do a quick Super R, and there we go. We see we've got the workspaces here, and the icons and format icons can kind of show you what we're dealing with. Beautiful. Let's clean this up a little bit. These icons are customizable, similar to my DWM config, where if you know what's going on that workspace at all times, you can use a Font Awesome or Nerd Font icon for that application and throw it on that workspace number. For us today, we're going to just go with the classic 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So let's just delete this block entirely here. And let's change this format to just name. Let's go ahead and reload our config. And there we go. We see 1, 2, etc. Perfect. One more thing here to add. I like to see all the workspaces, even if they're not active. So let's add a JSON key here called persistent workspaces. And let's set that equal to $9. All right, let's save that, reload that, and there we go. We see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Perfect. All right, the next thing we're gonna do in this file is add a window module that displays what is open in your current window, and we're gonna put that on the left side as well. So let's add the module down here. It's gonna be Hyprland window. And for this Hyprland window, we're gonna make it max length 40 and separate outputs. It's gonna set that to false. So separate outputs is for those of you with multiple monitors, it will show the window that's focused on all monitors instead of showing it on a per monitor basis. And the max length of 40 just makes it so that the module doesn't impede on the right side that we're going to be setting up shortly here. Now that we've created this module, let's add it to the modules left list. It's going to be Hyprland window. All right. And for the center modules, we're not going to be using any center modules today, so let's just delete this. And let's reload the file to see what that looks like. And there we go, we see the window module. So right now we have Hyprland open. Here we've got that GitHub link for Waybar still, so we can close that. But it tells you what we got. We got ports, Mozilla Firefox, Hyprland, and a shell here. Perfect. Let's work on some of these right side modules. Let's start by deleting a lot of these modules because most of them are not needed. And we're going for a semi-minimal config today. Remember that you can take this information from this video and really make your own bar custom for your own setup. But for me, I'm gonna trim this down to about 5 modules here. I'll be getting rid of those 3 here. We don't need the power profiles daemon. We don't need the temperature or the backlight or the keyboard state or the language. I'm I'm gonna comment out the battery because I do use the battery on my laptop, but this is a desktop computer, so we're not gonna need that. But for you guys, I will show you how to set that one up if you are on a laptop. Delete the second battery, delete custom power. I'll leave tray, even though I'm not gonna set that up today, but that is gonna be something that we would wanna set up later. All right, that looks pretty good for now. Let's reload the config here, and there we go. A little bit less bloated already. Let's start with this network widget. Let's make it super minimal. So we can just scroll down to this network section here, and I can actually delete everything here. So I'm gonna delete this. I'll keep the disconnected format here. I'll put a regular format here, and I'll just put online. That's all I need for me, because I'm on a wired connection here. Let's go ahead and reload that, and there you go. You see online. That's all we need to see. So guys, as I'm editing this file, you're gonna see me deleting a lot of stuff. I'm just gonna be deleting modules that we're not using today. So feel free to do that yourself. I'm gonna include a link to this config in the GitHub repository below the subscribe button. So just look for that if you wanna follow along. So we don't need those modules. We don't need the power profiles. We don't need battery 2. We'll get back to battery 1 in a second. We don't need backlight. We don't need temperature. We don't need idle inhibitor. We don't need MPD, we don't need the scratch pad, we don't need the mode for sway because we're not using sway, don't need the keyboard state, and that looks good. We've got a 75 line file, which is already pretty minimal, but let's keep tinkering with these widgets here. All right, for the CPU, we're gonna do format, and instead of this usage percentage CPU icon, I'm actually just gonna put the word CPU here with a colon, and then just delete that icon. And there we go, CPU, 71%, beautiful. All right, for the memory format, I'm gonna do mem, and that's gonna be used. And instead of a percent, that's actually just gonna give us a gigabyte value. So let's do that. Let's delete that icon here and save that file. Reload it, it's gonna be a lot cleaner for me. All right, let's add a disk widget here. So disk, it's gonna be interval, and we're gonna set the interval to 60 here so that it doesn't run every 1 second. That's the default value. We'll set the path to /, and the format is gonna be disk free. All right, go ahead and add that disk interval to the widgets list. Put that right below the memory. All right, there we go. We've got 5 widgets. It's looking pretty clean right now, actually. Looking a lot cleaner than those defaults. And for the battery, I'm not using it today because I'm on a desktop machine, but for you guys, this is what I do on my laptop. I make this 80 on good, and the format, I change this to bat opacity icon, and I throw in time. That'll tell me how much time's remaining. That's about it. I don't need these full charging plugged. I don't need any of that stuff. For alt, I'll do bat opacity. No icon. And format time, I want the time to be in hours, minutes. So I can't show that right now because I'm not on a laptop, but if you guys use this on a laptop, you can see this is going to be kind of a minimal style battery widget that is more in theme with what we're going to go for today. So encourage you to add that if you're on a laptop. All right, one more thing we want to do is add a separator. So let's call it custom/sep. And here we're going to do format. That's going to be a pipe. Interval 0. We don't ever want this to refresh. Tooltip false. So that just means we're not going to have a tooltip on hover. Let's go back to the modules right, and let's put a custom separator in between all these widgets here. So custom sep, go ahead, yank that, paste that there, paste that there, paste that there, and let's see what that looks like. All right, it looks pretty clean right now. Obviously we need to fix the CSS, but as far as the widgets and layouts goes, this looks pretty clean. So that's about it for the modules. Let's jump into the styles for the next step. All right, so this next part is going to be a lot of tedious CSS. So I do recommend having this part of the tutorial open in the website so you can follow along, because I will be copying and pasting some stuff here, namely from the colors section. But yeah, let's jump into that CSS file. All right, so we do have netrw open here in the Waybar folder. So let's jump into that CSS file here. And this is that default CSS file. It's pretty bulky. It's 327 lines. We're going to be deleting a lot of this today, but let's work with it as is so that you guys can see how to go from there. The first thing we want to do is define those color variables from the Tokyo Night theme, and there's a lot of ways you can get these. Like I said earlier, you can just use my pre-configured CSS file. You can get them from the website, which is what I'm going to do here for today's guide. And there we go. I've got my colors defined. All right, now we see the asterisk here, the star symbol, which is just global options in CSS. So let's add a couple options here. Let's go ahead and change font family to JetBrains Mono Nerd Font. And the font size, I'm going to make that 16px, and we are going to make that bold. So font weight bold. Let's save that. Delete that comment. Now, again, we have that script. We can reload it right now to see what it looks like. 16. Super R, already looking a lot better. Just a little bit bigger font and bolding it makes it already, yeah, a lot better. So tinker with this as needed. I'm going to keep this as is for now, and let's move on to the next step. All right, for the actual window on Waybar, let's change some stuff here. So we've got the window background. We're just going to make that @BG. Because remember, we defined that background color at the top of the file here. @BG, it's that black BG. So we can use that for the background color. And for the border, we'll just remove that straight up. I don't want that. So we can delete these transition properties. And then for the color, let's make that @foreground. And let's save that. And let's reload. And there we go. Already looking Tokyo Night-esque with that background in the foreground, so great. And yeah, this is already looking much better as far as visibility speaking, so let's keep going. I'm gonna remove this hidden attribute because we're not gonna hide the window. I'm gonna remove these comments. We're not using termite or chromium, so I'm gonna delete that. All right, let's go ahead and start cleaning up this file a little bit in terms of what's here for defaults, so that when we start to write our own stuff, we don't have to worry about things overlapping with them. So I'm gonna get rid of pretty much everything in the file, except this block here. I'm gonna keep this block where it just gives some padding and color to all of the modules. But other than that, I'm gonna delete everything. So let's start with this and just go from there. So deleting this, and then I'm gonna delete everything below this. So there. Now it's just a 43-line file, and we can start hacking away. And we can continue to clean up a little bit of the styling here. So we're gonna add some styling to the workspace buttons here, and the goal is to have a visual indicator on which workspace you're on, as well as which workspace has a application on it. So to do that, we needed to add a couple blocks here. I'm just going to copy paste this from my article that I wrote, and I'm just gonna go over it and explain what it does here. So let's save this file here and reload Waybar. And there we go. What we've got here is if a workspace is active, it will be visually indicated with the purple underline. If it is not active but not empty, it will still be cyan. So we have, for example, number 2, and I've got Firefox open on number 2. No purple underline, but it is cyan, so you do know that there is a window on there. Now, there is a weird issue where if it's a workspace that is new and there's nothing on it, for example, now I'm on 3, with Waybar, you need to actually specify that non-empty active workspaces have the same styling that you want for your active workspaces, which I've got here. And if it's empty, it's just empty. So this is what I'm gonna go with here. Feel free to customize this to your needs. All right, in terms of this big list of modules, we already removed a lot of them, so we can remove them from here as well. So we've got the clock. You can keep the battery if you want. We got the CPU, we got the memory, we got the disk. We don't have any of this other stuff here, so let's delete temperature, backlight. We do have the network. We don't have pulse audio, we don't have wire plumber, we don't have custom media. And we're not gonna be worrying about mode, idle inhibitor, scratchpad, profile daemons. I'm not gonna worry about any of that stuff. And yeah, we don't have MPD, so we can get rid of that. In terms of these modules, we're gonna go with 08px, and we are gonna keep it white. Let's just use our white variable since we defined it at the top of the file. So let's quickly go through these widgets here and make them just minimal to match our aesthetic here. So we'll go clock, we're gonna go color, cyan, and border bottom, 4px solid, cyan as well. And this is gonna be inspired by DistroTube's Xmonad configuration a little bit. You're gonna see what this looks like here. I'm just gonna refresh Waybar, and there we go. So that's what I'm gonna go for today's build. It's gonna be just, all the widgets are gonna be a different color with an underline underneath them. So make my life easier, I'm gonna take this block, copy and paste it. So that's the disk here. And for cyan, let's just change that to yellow. Save that. And there we go. We see the disk looks pretty good. And the next one is the memory. So let's copy that there. We'll change disk here to memory. We'll change the yellow to magenta here for that one. Save that, reload, and there we go. Magenta looks pretty good on that one. For the CPU, let's change magenta to green. There we go. Let's change the green on the network to the blue. There we go. That's pretty clean. One more thing to do. We don't have this in here, but we have the battery on my laptop, and on my laptop I like the battery to be magenta. But yeah, that looks pretty good. I mean, we have everything a lot more minimal, a lot more dialed than it was before. So I mean, it's, yeah, looking like a pretty good build of Waybar. And again, feel free to tinker with this as needed. I mean, this file is 81 lines and that's it. So it went from 342 lines to 81 lines, and it's a very minimal build. And this is so that you guys can go out and extend this to make it your own, make it whatever you want. So let's say you want to go change some of these colors. Yeah, change the colors. You want to change some of the font size, you know how to do that. You want to add a module, remove a module, you'll know how to do that. So, but yeah, this is very, very minimal, very clean. I like this. Let's keep going. Let's set up our application launcher and a wallpaper. For the wallpaper, let's head on over to wallhaven.cc and let's just grab something that pops out here. Let's go with this one. So we'll save that. I like to make a new folder in the home directory, call it walls, and we'll call this wall1.png. Cool. So we do need to set up a Hyprpaper config file. So let's quit out of this and let's type vim.config hyprpaper.conf, and it's just going to be 2 lines. Preload equals walls wall1.png, wallpaper equals comma walls wall1.png, and save that and quit that file. All right, let's test that Hyprpaper config by running Hyprpaper, and that's going to automatically point to the Hyprpaper config file. Let's put and disown here so that if we close this terminal, Hyprpaper still runs in the background. And there we go. We've got that wallpaper we just downloaded. Looks pretty good. We do need to configure Hyprpaper to run when we launch Hyprland. So let's go edit the Hyprland config file one more time. It's going to be vim config hyprland.conf. I'm going to delete a lot of these comments here. Let's go down to this auto start section here and just add Hyprpaper to this. But yeah, now Hyprpaper is going to launch whenever we launch Hyprland, which is great. Let's edit a couple more things while we're in this file here, and that's going to be the gaps. Right now we see we have a massive gap in between our terminal and on the outside of it. I'm not a huge fan of those big gaps. Let's go to that section here. Let's change our gaps out to 5. Change that border size to 1. So this is your personal preference. For me, I actually don't use gaps. I think they're kind of wasting real estate, honestly, but yeah, this is what I like. But for you guys, I think the 551 is going to be good, and we'll leave that for now. We'll go down to decoration for rounding. If we get rid of the rounding in the decoration section, it's going to match our Waybar config a lot more. So we save that file. Yeah, I mean, that looks it looks really good, actually. This is a very clean setup here. And again, feel free to play with this as needed. I've went ahead and went gaps 1 on the inside just for that little tiny gap in the middle. But yeah, this looks clean, honestly. I like it. All right, we can quit that. The last thing we need to do is make this actually match our theme, because this looks hideous. So let's jump into that. For the Wofi config, it points to config Wofi. So let's go ahead and do mkdir.config Wofi, and let's vim that file. It's called config, no extension. And if you follow along the tutorial here on the website, you can just click the Wofi section here. This is my Wofi config right here. I've been tinkering with it for a while making this video, and I think this is kind of the sweet spot for me. I'm just going to paste in what I've already made here, and I'm not going to go over this line by line, but a lot of these options are really self-documenting. You can take a look at these, but the one thing we do need to do is more CSS. Yeah, love that. But yeah, the last line of this file tells Wofi to point to a CSS style sheet, and that's going to be called style.css. So we actually need to make that file. So in netrw, I can just hit % and do style.css. And as far as this style sheet goes, I actually went over to this ports website and I searched Wofi, and I actually just copied this guy's style CSS and modified it slightly. So you can just take mine here from the tutorial, which is just a modified version of his, to include the JetBrains mono font, among some other things here. So let's save that. All right, so we should be able to open Wofi here, and it should be matching our config a lot more here. So yep, there we go. Look at that, beautiful. And yeah, the system is looking pretty dialed here. We can open up a terminal here, can run Yazi, kind of do some file exploring on the terminal here if we want. We can go ahead and open up Vim here. Let's say we wanted to open up Firefox, we can do so with Wofi. Yeah, this is a workable setup for me. And this is just the beginning of Hyprland here, so this is gonna hopefully be a great source for you guys to start customizing your own personal setup. Alright, that's gonna be it for today's video. If you have any questions or recommendations on any other Linux related content, as usual, just drop a comment. And it wouldn't be a proper video without an obligatory Neofetch.